Уважаемые участники конференции, я думаю, что уже у нас 5 минут нашей сессии, и чтобы... Скажите, меня хорошо слышно? Чтобы не занимать время у наших докладчиков, я думаю, что мы можем начать, и уже другие коллеги подключатся к нам позже. Я думаю, что уже сейчас, ко второму году пандемии, уже все научились работать в Zoom. Но еще раз напомню, что на данной сессии доступен синхронный перевод. Если вы посмотрите на нижней панели, вы увидите глобус, там, где написано Interpretation, и вы можете выбрать тот канал, который вам более комфортен для восприятия. Английский либо русский. И для тех, кому без разницы, могут слушать на языке оригинала. Еще раз разрешите представиться. Меня зовут Саида Ismailakhunova. Я являюсь старшим экономистом, работаю у Всемирного банка, работаю по вопросам бедности и равенства в странах Центральной Азии с фокусом на Кыргызскую Республику и Туркменистан. И также я руковожу проектами по статистике в нашем регионе, как в Кыргызстане, так и в странах Кавказа. Сегодняшняя тема нашей сессии, она очень актуальна для Центральной Азии, непосредственно для Кыргызской Республики, но также и для Таджикистана. Почему? Поскольку бедность и неравенство являются, особенно в постковидный период, является очень актуальной темой. Как мы знаем, пандемия ковид, она повлияла имеет не только экономические последствия для здоровья, но и очень большие социальные последствия, да, что ведет к тому, что в наших странах мы наблюдаем увеличение бедности и наблюдаем увеличение неравенства как в доходах, так и в доступе к основным базовым услугам, которые позволяют осуществлять жизнедеятельность граждан, семей, индивидов. Поэтому сегодняшняя тематика, данная сессия, она очень актуальна, и она резонирует с последними направлениями. И нам будет очень, думаю, интересно сегодня поделиться последними наработками, последними докладами в этой сфере. Сегодня у нас, я так понимаю, 3 докладчика, и, к сожалению, я почему-то не получила короткую биографию, но, может быть, я пропустила, поэтому... значит, у нас сегодня 3 докладчика, и все доклады, они, естественно, на эту тему. И хочу сказать, что когда я также была в комиссии по отбору, и хотела бы сказать, что очень сильные были статьи именно по данному направлению. Сейчас у нас будет различные докладчики с различных стран, и мы очень рады, что на нашей конференции принимают участие, и поскольку это виртуально, есть возможность, чтобы участвовали очень именитые, я бы сказала, профессора, которые очень долго работают по Кыргызстану. И, честно говоря, я сама очень рада, что лично знаю, например, Франциску Gassmann и Eszter Timar, и мне очень радостно их видеть. Первый доклад будет сделан этими 2 докладчиками, и он будет сфокусирован на том, какая есть позиция по социальной лестнице и перераспределительные предпочтения на эксперименте в Кыргызской Республике. Я думаю, что этот вопрос будет очень интересен, и передаю слово Франциске и Эстер.
Thank you, Saida. Good afternoon to everyone. Let me just try and share my screen. Can you see it okay?
Yes, we can see it well.
Thank you. And it's, do you see the presenter view or just the main slide?
Yeah, your slide. So okay. Everything is okay, you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. So Saida already introduced us, but let me just quickly reintroduce ourselves. So my colleague, Franziska Gassmann, she is a professor of social protection and development at Maastricht University, and she has worked in Kyrgyzstan for, I believe, over 20 years. And my name is Eszter Timar. I used to work for Maastricht University as well, and now I work for the UNICEF Office of Research in Italy. So I will present our paper on subjective position on the social ladder and how this influences policy preferences for social protection. I will walk you through the background and rationale really quickly, discuss the methodology, the results, and then reflect on some of the conclusions that we found. So just to give you a brief introduction to the background, as most of you probably are aware, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the social protection system in Kyrgyzstan underwent considerable changes. One of these changes was the introduction of a unified benefit for poor families with children, known as the MBPF. However, this had quite some challenges. One of the main problems was, and still is, that it reaches only very few of the poorest children in the country, therefore making very little progress towards reducing child poverty, which would be the main objective of this transfer. To address these challenges in 2017, there was a proposed law to replace this program with a child benefit provided to all families with children. Even the parliament voted in favor of this reform, but in the end it did not take place because of political constraints, including public unrest. So in the end, only minor adjustments were made to the program design instead. Now this is very puzzling because political economy models would have predicted that there would be broad public support for such a reform because so many of the population would have benefited from it. Hence, it raised a couple questions in our heads. What might be people's beliefs about poverty and social protection in Kyrgyzstan? And what are the forces that shape people's preferences for social protection in this context? So first we turn to the literature, and when you look at the literature on preferences for redistribution, you find three overarching themes, strains of literature. So one of these look at how people's beliefs about fairness in society, so whether luck or merit or hard work matters in getting forward in society, values, attitudes, and explanations of poverty influence social protection demand. Another strand of the literature looks at individual self-interest. So this literature argues that people's perceived present and future need for social protection is what drives their preferences. And then another strand of literature comes from the Meltzer and Richard hypothesis, which says that countries with high pre-tax and pre-transfer inequality will demand higher redistribution. Some newer contributions to the literature on this domain argue that people are not actually aware of the levels of inequality in the country, including their own position in the income ladder, so that instead of objective inequality, it is perceived or subjective inequality that matters. Now, we position our research really at the intersection of these three strands when we try to answer questions specific to Kyrgyzstan, like what are the patterns of biases in individuals' perceived positions in the socioeconomic ladder? How do perceived socioeconomic positions influence people's support for redistribution? How do people's attitudes towards the poor shape their social protection preferences? And how plastic are these preferences and misconceptions about socioeconomic positions? So what is the effect of correcting these misconceptions on people's preferences? These are also important questions to answer because most of the empirical work so far has been US and Europe focused. So we were wondering, do these patterns hold in a different political, historic, economic context, such as a CIS country like Kyrgyzstan? To answer these questions, we used original household survey data that was collected between August and October of 2019. Now, the primary objective of this data collection was to evaluate recent programmatic changes to child benefits. So this was commissioned and financed by UNICEF. But as a secondary objective, we collected data on people's preferences, attitudes, perceived positions on the socioeconomic ladder, and so on. We interviewed almost 2,000 households with children across 8 oblasts. Our sample is heavily skewed to the left, and this is because of the original objective. 3/4 of our sample are poor households. These are split into beneficiaries of social assistance of this child benefit, poor households that applied for the child benefit but were rejected, and poor households that would arguably be qualifying for this program but never applied. And then 24.4% of our sample is non-poor families that are not the target population of social protection. Our survey also included an experimental setup. So this was a randomized experimental design supposed to reveal and correct potential biases in respondents' perceived position on the socioeconomic ladder. So what this means is that our interviewers told people to imagine a 10-step ladder where the bottom step represents the poorest 10% of the population, and the highest step represents the richest 10% of the population. And then they asked them to position themselves on this ladder. After this question, approximately 50% of the sample was provided a treatment, and this treatment was the provision of information regarding their actual position. So for these people, the interviewer said, you thought that you are on the 3rd step, but in reality, you are on the 5th step. You can see on the table on the right hand that this treatment was indeed randomly allocated, approximately 50-50 as the ratio of the treatment and the control group, and these two groups did not significantly differ in any of the key socio-demographic characteristics. And after this experimental element, the interviewer proceeded by asking them questions about their redistributive preferences and beliefs. Our empirical strategy, our analysis, had different elements. First, we used some chi-square tests to see if there are between group differences in attitudes towards poverty and preferences for government support to the poor. Then we used some linear regressions predicting subjective income position to see what explains what people believe to be their own position. Then we used multivariate analysis in the form of probit regressions, where the dependent variable was policy preferences. And we used independent variables such as attitudes towards poverty, social assistance experience, and subjective income. Finally, for the experimental element, we used t-tests and probit regressions to capture the marginal treatment effects of this information provision. So respondents were asked about the reasons for poverty in the country, whether they think the main reasons are people's bad luck, laziness and the lack of willpower, the challenges of the economy, or a sort of injustice in society. Following the work of some American sociologists, we decided to group these explanations into individualist and structuralist modes of explanation. So people who think that bad luck or a character flaw like laziness or lack of willpower are to blame for poverty are individualistic thinkers, and those who blame the economy or injustices are structuralist thinkers. Overall, we see that it is more common in Kyrgyzstan, at least in this left-skewed sample, to subscribe to structuralist explanations of poverty. However, respondents who are not the target population of assistance, so the not low-income people, were more likely to blame the individual for poverty than the rest of our sample. It seems like these views about the reasons of poverty are also connected to policy preferences. Overall, there seems to be wide support for government intervention, and structuralists are more likely to support government help. But the respondents who are not the target population of social assistance were less likely to support government help than any of the three low-income groups. We then proceeded by looking at people's more specific policy preferences. So the previous questions just asked them whether the government should support the poor. Now we look at what type of support they envisage for the government to provide to the poor. We see that their worldviews, their attitudes towards poverty also affect their modality preferences. Overall, job creation was the most popular. Cash seems to be more popular among structuralists, and jobs more popular among individualists. This latter, the fact that individualist thinkers who blame the individual's character flaws for their poverty might mean that they are more likely to stigmatize the poor. So individualists might be more likely to subscribe to the stereotypes that I'm sure all of us have heard before, like the poor will just spend the money on alcohol and cigarettes, while people who blame structuralist reasons are less likely to think so. And the benefit experience also seems to matter. Non-poor respondents, so not the target population, are less in favor of money and more in favor of food and jobs than the rest of our sample. We then proceed to analyze the perceived positions on the social ladder. So only 1 in 5 of our respondents were correct in estimating their position on the socioeconomic ladder. All of the rest had some kind of biased perceptions. So you can see on this graph that subjective consumption deciles show a very different distribution than objective deciles. This can be for a variety of reasons. One of the options is that individuals are unable to observe income at the country level. So they just arrive at a naive estimate of their own income position based on observing their reference groups, so the people around them. And then they position themselves relative to those people. This is called the reference group hypothesis. Another option is last place aversion, which means that people do not like to position themselves either at the bottom or at the top of the distribution, which would also explain this tendency towards the mean in the subjective consumption distribution. Overall, poor people tended to think that they are better off, and rich people tended to think that they are worse off. Now, what affects subjective position? We see that objective position does inform subjective position, but it doesn't predict it perfectly. There are different forces at work. Experience with poverty-targeted programs also influences where people see themselves in the distribution. So you can see, for instance, that poor people who applied for social assistance but were rejected, ergo told that they are not poor enough to qualify, they overestimate their positions. And then we find some supportive evidence of the reference group hypothesis. You can see that location really matters. So one can argue that people see the people who live in the same location, the same oblast as themselves, so they compare themselves to them. We then ran 37 probit models where policy preferences were the dependent variable, and did some multivariate analysis, including all of the factors that I talked about in the past slides. So when we look at the factors that shape demand for government distribution, government support to the poor overall, we see that individualist thinkers have less demand. Benefit experience is associated with more demand. Subjective income is a stronger predictor of demand for redistribution than objective income, and geographic location still matters. However, when we ask people for their preferences for the type of support to the poor, so whether they should receive cash, food, or jobs, attitudes towards poverty, benefit experience, and even subjective income are not significant anymore, but geographic location still matters. One hypothesis here is that it could have something to do with access to markets or the functioning of markets. So cash might be less useful if you cannot get to the market than receiving food, for example. Now we get to the experimental results, and here we used 4 dependent variables. We kept the government should support the poor, and the government should support the poor with money or food. And we added 2 other dependent variables. One gauges people's aversion to inequality. So this is a statement that says the gap between the poor and the rich is too large. And one looks at preferences for redistribution, but it includes an altruistic element. So it says, I would give up part of my income in taxes to help the poor. Overall, t-tests and probit regressions show no treatment effect here. But we assume that this might be because treatment effect is heterogeneous depending on pre-treatment characteristics. So it's likely that people who have a positive bias, who think they are richer than they are, respond differently to the information treatments than people who think they are poorer than they actually are. However, even if we run models accounting for the different types of biases, we still see no significant treatment effects. So then we were wondering, could potentially people's explanations of poverty mediate treatment effect? And it seems like in some cases it does. So for instance, if you look at the first graph depicting people's treatment effects when the dependent variable is the gap between the rich and the poor is too large. So in other words, inequality aversion. We first see that individualist and structuralist people respond to the treatment differently. It's exactly the opposite. So structuralists with a negative bias have a positive response, and individualists with a negative bias have a negative response. And this one is highly significant as well. So people who blame individual character flaws for poverty and think that they are poorer than they are, once they are informed that they are actually better off than they thought, they are less likely to think that the gap between the rich and the poor is too large. For overall demand for government support to the poor, which is the graph on the right-hand side, we don't see significant treatment effects, but we still see that structuralists and individualists seem to be responding to the treatment quite the opposite way. Again, for our question about transfer modality, so whether it should be money or food or jobs, structuralists and individualists respond to the treatment in the opposite direction, but the treatment effect here is not significant. And when we look at the question with the altruistic element, we see that the only significant treatment effect is among structuralists who thought they were worse off, but were informed that they actually have more money relative to the rest of population than they thought. So in conclusion, we have quite a number of findings. One is that structuralist explanations of poverty are quite common in Kyrgyzstan, at least in a left-skewed sample like ours, and most people seem to blame the challenges of the economy for poverty. Seeing poverty as the result of character flaws, however, is more common among non-poor respondents. The way people explain poverty also influences their demand for social protection. Structuralist thinkers are more in favor of government redistribution, and individualist thinkers are more against government intervention. This is also consistent with prior research from the US and Europe, for example, by Alberto Alesina and colleagues. People who are not the target population of social assistance are more likely to be individualist in their thinking, and they are less likely to see a role for the government in helping the poor. This might be due to self-interest, so they might perceive a lower present and future need for social protection, therefore they are less in favor of it. We also find that there are systematic biases in people's subjective positions on the socioeconomic ladder, and this is also similar to what prior research has found in different contexts. We see that these biases also matter for redistributive preferences. So people's subjective income is a stronger predictor of their policy preferences than objective income is. On average, we see that correcting people's perceptions with an information treatment does not significantly affect their stated preferences. So their preferences are less elastic than found in prior research in different contexts. However, once we account for belief systems about poverty and fairness, we find that these factors might mediate how people respond to correcting their biases. And this last point is quite a novel angle in the literature. This has not been done before. And now I don't know if are we going to open the floor now for questions or after all of the presentations are done?
I think that we can, first of all, thank you very much for very interesting presentation and also for very interesting research questions. Indeed.
I'm sorry, could you hear what the interpreter said?
Me?
Yeah, anybody?
No, I couldn't hear it, but maybe it's because I don't have Russian interpretation on.
Just a second. Можно переводчика попросить на свой канал перевести что-то на русском сказать? Хорошо. Just a second. There were some technical issues.
Saida, what did you say?
Yeah, there were some technical issues with interpretation, and so now I'm saying is that thanks a lot for the presentation. It was really exciting to hear these results of your research.
Было очень интересно послушать результаты исследования. Есть ли у участников вопросы? Вы можете...
You can also ask a question in real time because we have 16 people, so I think it's manageable if people will ask using microphone. However, you can also use the chat box, and this question will be asked and answered by our speakers. So, do we have any? If not, I would suggest to continue with presentations and then...
Saida,
yes.
Kedar has a question.
Yes, Kedar.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for a really nice and interesting presentation, and it's nice to see that how big sample size you consider for your research, and even it's not it was distributed over Kyrgyzstan, so various oblasts. So it's a really great detailed work. I have a question, a very short question, that what do you think or what do you suggest to eliminate poverty in Kyrgyzstan? So basically, do you have any conceptual framework, or like what do you think of where, what should be the strategy? Yeah.
You know, this is a tough question, and this is, I think, exactly why we have done this research, yes, because the proposal which was suggested in 2017, we believe might have really had a step forward in terms of poverty reduction. But on the other hand, social protection is only one angle you can look at. But given everything what happened, our question really was, what do the Kyrgyz people want? You know, that's the thing. What would they actually support? And this is not as clear cut. It's in none of the societies as clear cut. But if you look at the more the European welfare states, also there, this has a long tradition, and it's also something we should not forget. And we just got published another paper on the Kyrgyz Republic based on the LiK data we have presented, I guess, 2 years ago, which looks at the subjective well-being and benefit receipt. And what you can see also there, that let's say the spirit of the Soviet Union still remains in many people's heads. And this is very difficult to change these frameworks and cultural context to some extent. So that also, I think, makes it very difficult to say what would be the appropriate way forward. So in a way, you can say maybe it was wise of the ministry to step down the government and say, okay, no, let's do not introduce this change, but let's move on slowly. But another thing is, which we cannot test, is maybe it was just really badly communicated, you know. So that is not something we can say. In this paper, we can really only say, try to understand what the preferences are.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Franziska. It's yeah, what people want in the Kyrgyz Republic, it's sometimes a big question on many topics. Sometimes even people here, so all we don't understand what we want. So we have next question from Asil Dolatkieldieva. Are these results already published, and how can we consult them? So did you publish where we can see the paper, where we can see the data set?
You will have to give us some time. So what we have right now is the analysis, and we have some draft, but we have really to work on it. And to get obviously we do want to publish the paper, that's very clear, but we have to work on this to get it into shape so that we can really send to a journal. But I think you have another question, Azel. You cannot unmute yourself. I'm sure somebody will unmute you. Can somebody unmute Azel Dolatkieldieva? Okay.
Hello, I'm sorry for my no camera for myself, no image, I'm sorry. Thanks so much for these fascinating findings. It was really informative. I was just wondering whether there is a way to also include the political and cultural variables into the ways people think of poverty and how they distribute themselves on the social ladders. What I mean is that what we miss in Kyrgyzstan is the political discourse of poverty. There are no this left-right political divisions. There are no political parties which would politicize these questions. And therefore, even to kind of, for people to actually understand the legitimacy of government actions in terms of distribution or non-distribution of benefits. So there is this whole political discussion that is missing, that would help citizens to structure their beliefs about the proper distribution. So how actually in such an environment, in such a context, we can talk actually about the way people think of poverty?
I mean, that is we do not have these kind of political questions in the survey. So we did not ask, for example, the standard questions, whether they are happy with the president or whether they are more left-wing, right-wing. So we have none of these questions about the political background. The only thing about, let's say, more what we would say cultural variables is one thing is that we can distinguish, for example, between the North and the South, because there are some cultural differences, you can say, between what is closer to Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and you have in the north of Kyrgyzstan. That is also something we have discovered in an earlier paper where we looked at, let's say, more the labor market incentives of social protection. The other thing is what we also wanted to look at is exactly this, you know, to reflect an experience in the under Soviet regime, and we can do that by separating our respondents based on age. And it's very interesting. So in this other paper on the subjective well-being, that really mattered, yes. And so actually how happy you are with the benefit that you receive can be, so one of the explanation is indeed whether you were, let's say, whether you experienced, let's say, the country before independence. However, here in our analysis so far, we did not see that there was a difference in terms of, based on this experience. So we are a little bit limited as to what extent we can actually include these kind of variables. So I think the best we can do is look at the structuralist versus individualistic perspective on whether, you know, this is it's just your own fault that you are poor, or whether, no, thank you, it's the economy, let's say.
Now to next presentation, and then if you still have questions, please type them in chat. Если у вас есть вопросы, пожалуйста, пишите в чате. По данной презентации в том числе и по следующим презентациям мы обязательно спросим.
Я прошу прощения, техническая поддержка. У вас шумы идут сильные от вас. То ли что-то с микрофоном от провода, провод, то есть от микрофона, то ли еще что-то. Половина звука не слышно. Что... Не слышно вообще. Нет, не слышно. Давайте еще раз проверим.
Так, еще раз слышно меня?
Отлично, просто спасибо вам большое. Извините.
Все замечательно. И извиняюсь, my apologies for there were some technical issues with microphone. Я предлагаю перейти к следующей презентации. И если у вас есть вопросы по первой презентации, пожалуйста, пишите их в чате. Мы обязательно спросим у наших первых докладчиков. И мне еще раз разрешите поблагодарить Франциску Gassmann и Eszter Timar за очень интересную презентацию. Я думаю, что результаты действительно оставляют вопросы, над которыми можно и нужно задуматься. Следующая презентация у нас будет сделана Даной Сайлаухановой. Она является представителем Академии ОБСЕ. И тема ее доклада – это понимание взаимосвязи между образованием и риском бедности с гендерной точки зрения на примере Казахстана. Мне бы хотелось сказать, что данная тематика, она очень продолжает иметь свою актуальность в наших странах. И, конечно же, мы видим, что в во время пандемии, когда дети учились в онлайн-режиме, это сказалось достаточно сильно на качестве образования и особенно на уязвимых и бедных слоях населения. Поэтому давайте заслушаем. Я думаю, что эта презентация будет также интересна. Дана, слово вам.
Спасибо большое. Let me share my screen. So let me know if you guys can hear me and if you can see the slide.
Yes, we can hear and see.
Yes, but now it's better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So hi everyone, I would like to thank Life in Kyrgyzstan conference for this opportunity to share my small MA thesis with you guys and discuss it. And my topic is understanding the relationship between education and poverty risk from gender perspective, case of Kazakhstan. And let me start off with the fact that actually poverty issues are very relevant to Kazakhstan. And as it was stated by Alma Kudebayeva, who actually researched chronic poverty in Kazakhstan, almost a quarter of Kazakh population is chronically poor. And what we mean by chronically poor is the fact that people are poor in a very long duration, and it's multidimensional, and it's very severe according to the Hume, Moore, and Shefford's definition. So when it comes to poverty, one of the determinants that reduce the poverty is education. And I wanted to see how education affects poverty risk for household heads in Kazakhstan. So this is my research question. And this paper originally was intended to be an empirical paper. However, some results were very interesting. That's why I decided to turn it into mixed methods. Therefore, the next question is more for the qualitative part. And this is why education has different impact on reducing poverty risk based on gender. So my hypothesis is it is assumed that education generally decreases the risk of being poor. However, the effect could be different for female and male-headed households. So my methodology, as I mentioned before, it's mixed methods. For quantitative research, I am using secondary data from mixed multiple indicator cluster survey that was done in 2015 by UNICEF and Statistical Committee of Kazakhstan. My sample size is 16,495 individuals, and I will be using binary logistic regression model that was adopted from the paper called The Impact of Household Heads' Education Levels on Poverty Risk, the Evidence from Turkey. And the next slide will be about the model itself. So as you can see, it's a binary logistic regression model. It is very good for cases when the dependent variable is binary, so it's either poor or non-poor. The variable was developed from this data set has a variable for wealth index quantile. So the poor will be equal to 1 if the wealth index quantile was equal to poorest, and it's equal to 0 if the wealth index quantile is equal to richest quantile or fourth, middle, or second quantile. The next variable, independent variables include education in years, gender, 1 if it's female, 0 if it's male, residence, urban, so 1 if it's urban and 0 if it's rural, age, it's a household head's age, household size, adults, it's the number of adults in the household, Fem-eduk is an interaction term between gender and education. And I also have regional dummy variables for each region in Kazakhstan, Akmola being the base. So next is the qualitative part of my research. It includes interviews, semi-structured interviews with female household heads. My sample size is 6, which is quite small. However, my qualitative research is more like a supplementary to my quantitative research. And I have used exponential non-discriminative snowball selection when I was selecting respondents. So when I was designing my qualitative research, I was looking at 3 respondents with higher education, meaning bachelor's, master's, and PhD, as well as 3 respondents with secondary education or vocational training. In the data analysis from this mixed data set, we can see that the poor household heads mostly have either upper secondary education, meaning they completed high school, or technical and professional education. We see that the share of people who have higher education is rather small in this group. The next is I looked at non-poor households. So this graph is for male heads, and we can see that the increasing education shows increasing wealth index. So if you have higher education, the share of richest quintile households who belong to richest quintile is also increasing. And in the next, it's a graph for female heads, and we can see the similar trend. And when we look at poor households in regions, we can see that with North Kazakhstan, we have something very interesting happening. Overall, we have a very big number of poor households in North Kazakhstan, and most of them, they have university degrees at most, which can be maybe explained by some regional specifics. Well, my results for quantitative research, when you run logistic regression, it gives off results in log odds, which is very hard to interpret. So it should be exponentiated and turned into odds ratio, which is more clear to understand. So when we interpret this data, these variables in this table, I have included only significant variables at 99%. And the results show that living in an urban area reduced the odds of being poor by almost 90%. And having female household head reduced the odds of being poor by 55.6%. And each additional year of education also reduced the odds of being poor by 20%. And each additional adult in the household reduced the odds of being poor by 13%. So we can see that the residents, the gender of the household head, the education, and the number of adults in the household actually have positive impact on reducing the odds of being poor. And the interaction term between education and gender actually shows the results that every additional year of education has less effect on reducing the odds of being poor for female heads. So we see that there's a gender difference in that. And I have also introduced interaction term for region and gender, as well as region and education. However, they were not significant and they were dropped from the model. When we look at geography, we can see that living in the cities like Aktobe, Atyrau, Almaty city, it actually has significant impact on reducing the odds of being poor. And living in regions like North Kazakhstan and South Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan region has a great impact on increasing the odds of being poor. However, other regions showed insignificant results. So when we look at the results of qualitative research, we know that I have interviewed 6 people in total. The age for these women are from 43 to 50. And this table illustrates a clear result of the interview, which will be discussed further. And this table illustrates the attitude towards education. Many women whom I have interviewed, they have positive attitude towards their education because they believe that their education is a prerequisite to their career. So if they didn't get that education, that degree, they wouldn't be working in this place. Some of the interviewed people, they got their 2nd degree. And here we have 2 examples. One of the respondents, she had a positive attitude towards her 2nd degree. However, the other respondent has a negative attitude towards her 2nd degree because she didn't like her job that she got thanks to this degree. Trainings, courses, and professional development shows positive attitude. So we have one example of a respondent taking a course and increasing her income. And some of the interviewed women, they expressed a feeling of regretfulness about their unfinished education or their wishes about continuing their education. And when it comes to their children's education, these women express support and the willingness to invest in their children's education, which shows that the education is very important to them. So my findings conclude as for all these women, income was enough for everyday expenses. So despite women having a bachelor's degree or a college degree, vocational training, all of them had the income that was enough for their everyday expenses. One of my respondents said that I can't afford anything major. However, I can afford to live peacefully, go to store and buy products. Respondents with higher education, they have savings, and which was a very surprising outcome because all of my respondents with higher education, they had some kind of savings, while all of my respondents with secondary education or vocational education, they didn't have the means to save. And they said that they save usually 10% of their income. This is one of my respondents' answer. She said 10. It is generally known that 10% of income should be saved. So she saved. And if she had more money left at the end of the month, maybe she will be saving even more. So the next part, the next findings regard the respondents with secondary education and vocational training. They express their inability to save. So one of my respondents said that when she was doing commerce, it was possible for her to save. However, now she cannot save as her income is being spent on groceries, clothes, and loan payments and current expenses. If in the future she will have some money left, of course she will be saving it. 5 out of 6 respondents, they have financial obligations in the form of consumer loans or mortgages. Only one respondent, she expressed her negative thoughts about taking any loan. In her words, she said that she thanks God that she doesn't have any loans. And up until now, she didn't have any reasons to get any loans. So if she will ever need to buy something, she will buy it for cash. So when I was thinking about why there's a difference, why education has different impact on male household heads and female household heads, and when I was designing my interviews in a way that I will compare women with higher education with women with lower education, and they should all have something in common. They should have something that brings them together, that might be the answer to the question why education has different impact on male household heads and female household heads. And all of them, all of the women that I have interviewed, they have something in common, and it's maternity leave. And as we can see, all of the respondents took maternity leave or didn't participate in the formal job market due to childcare. One of my respondents, she took 17-year-long break from her medical career, which originally started off as maternity leave, but as she was a single parent, she had to take care of her child, and working as a medical professional didn't give her enough income. That's why she took a break, and she did a small business on the side. Another respondent didn't work until her youngest child started kindergarten, and only after that she went and got her first degree, university degree, and started working. Another respondent was a stay-at-home mother until recently her family moved to Almaty. And respondent number 4, she started working only after her spouse lost his business, and she had to start bringing income to the household. And some of the respondents, they took typical classical 3 to 5 years of break for maternity leave. And from my qualitative research, I came to conclusion maybe that taking a break, whether it's a maternity leave or not participating in the formal job market, maybe dilutes the effect of education. So in the case of women, we have, for example, if she gets an education and after that she has a child, which is why she needs to take a maternity leave, that time period when she was taking care of her child, it kind of affects her education, and it decreases the impact of education on her future income. So in a way, after the child care maternity leave, there are 2 options. If the break was too long, as it happened to one of my respondents, she had to get a new degree in order to come back to medicine. What happened to my another respondent was the fact that she didn't have the means to go to educational institution and get a degree. Therefore, she went and started working in a low-paying job. And another possible outcome is when a female has a higher education, however, she took some amount of time to take care of her child, and that time also affects her income in the future. So when it comes to men in our society, we see that they get their education and they start working and they gain experience. So there was no interruption to apply the knowledge that was gained from degree. And because they have more experience, they will be earning more money. And in this case, we can see that possibly maternity leave could be the reason why education has less impact on female household heads. And my conclusion is that my quantitative research results show that education reduces the odds of being poor for household heads in Kazakhstan by 20%. So each additional year of education has reduces the odds of being poor by 20%. On average, each year of additional education has less impact on reducing the poverty for female household heads. And from qualitative research, I concluded that not participating in the labor market or getting a maternity leave or having a break in career could be the reason why education has less impact on reducing the odds of being poor for female household heads. So thank you very much. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Спасибо большое, да, ну, действительно интересно. И мы видим такие же достаточно похожие выводы и по Кыргызстану с некоторой спецификой. Но разрешите мне спросить вопросы, если у нас сейчас у кого-то вопросы. Да, Франциска.
Thank you, Dana, for a very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. And I think it's very important that we analyze the relation, let's say, between level of education and poverty. I also really like that you combine your quantitative analysis with qualitative findings. And I would invite you to extend, the number of interviews over time. So because 6 is indeed very, very little, right? But I have some suggestions maybe for you for your quantitative analysis, and I also have maybe some suggestions regarding or just some thoughts about your conclusion about the maternity break. I mean, first of all, what I was just wondering, it would be good if you could indicate what is the percentage of female heads you actually have in your sample, right? Is this very common in Kazakhstan, or is it actually, household head? It depends also how it was defined. That is something you may want to look at. And then I also think, I mean, there are a couple of issues. Education and is as such really endogenous to the welfare level. And I don't know whether you could think of any econometric approach in order to deal with that endogeneity. So that's something you could, for example, think of. But I also would think what I would have done is definitely separate the models, or estimate the models separately. Estimate one model only with men and estimate one model only with your female heads. Because that will also give you an indication to whether there are different correlations that are significant in explaining the welfare status of these different households. Then I've also been thinking, given that the hypothesis you then develop based on your qualitative findings, I think some of that you can actually include in your analysis, but I'm not quite sure. So whether it has, first of all, I think you need to include marital status, yes? Because we know that women that are either divorced or widowed are usually in a much more dire situation. That is one thing to consider. The other thing is I've been thinking about the children. Now, would it be possible do you have in your household women with and without children? So the mix is very often obviously a survey targeted to families with children. But it would be interesting to see whether actually it matters whether a woman is living together with children, for example, has had children compared to those who are not, because that could provide some indication as to your potential explanation. Now, you will not know whether they went on maternity leave, but if you have a variable in the mix which tells you something about the work experience, let's say how many years somebody has been working, you know how long they have been in school and how old they are, you could, I guess, create a variable which gives you some indication about how many years somebody was actually taking care of the children, or at least was inactive. That is something you might want to look at as well, which then give you some indication of where you were. And you know, the thing is also about the maternity leave. I mean, in most countries, also in the Netherlands, we know, for example, that women are totally at a disadvantage. As such, for example, it was just recently in the Netherlands, another study, even though we have one of the best pension systems in the world, women's pension is much smaller, yes, when they come to pension age. This has to do because, yes, they take care of the children, but then also they reduce their work once they have children. And that is one thing. Otherwise, they are also very often in female occupations, which are paid at a lower rate. But so there is enough research on that as well, which explains that if you go long on maternity leave, and if then even combined with being separated or divorced, so that this has detrimental consequences. So it might not be the education, yes, which explains that they are poor, but all these other structural factors which affect women's earning power, let's say. But very interesting. By all means, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I would like to address the fact that the dataset has limitations, and I don't have such variables, unfortunately. I tried to use the household budget survey, but I don't have the access to that one as well. So it was, yeah, my research has some limitations for sure, yeah. But I'm really thankful for your feedback.
Yes, thank you, Franziska, and thank you, Dana. I think this is one of the benefits of this type of platforms, when you can have a direct comments from one of the best professors in Maastricht University. So I think that those comments will enrich your research a lot if you will be able to incorporate. And I think that for Kazakhstan, data set actually is available for research purposes. So you might want to reach out to the statistical office and request maybe at the university level the data set, because it's a pretty rich data set and a lot of information is there. Thank you very much, Dana. Let me ask other participants whether they have any other comments or questions. Уважаемые участники сессии, если у вас есть еще вопросы к Дане или по первой презентации, пожалуйста, печатайте их в чате, либо можете спрашивать в микрофон, поскольку участников не так много, и я думаю, что мы можем достаточно эффективно управлять вопросами. Пока вопросов нет, я думаю, что мы перейдем к следующей презентации. В конце сессии будет еще возможность задать свои вопросы. И разрешите мне представить следующего докладчика. Это Kedar Mehta. Он является представителем Института новых энергетических систем Высшей технической школы. И со своими коллегами сегодня он представляет доклад относительно источников средств к существованию в сельских районах и энергетическая уязвимость. И я так понимаю, что в его анализе он изучал различные факторы, которые влияют на структуру потребления энергии домохозяйств и переход к устойчивой энергетике. Я думаю, что это тоже очень актуальная и важная тема, поэтому, Kedar, слово вам.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction, and let me just share my screen, and I hope it's on your desk now. I think
Yes,
okay.
we can see it clearly.
Perfect. So hello everyone, welcome to my presentation, and I would like to present today this rural livelihoods and energy vulnerability in Kyrgyzstan. So my topic is really different than the previous researchers, as it is focused more on energy and rural livelihoods. Personally, I believe that energy in Kyrgyzstan is a really big research topic, and today I will try to address one of the core concerns, and that is the rural Kyrgyzstan and energy, where I believe or at least assume that this inequality and low income plays a key role. So it fits well here, and I'm really looking forward to discuss the results with you. So yeah, the research the research is carried out within the framework of the project Ecoflux Plan, which is funded by Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And the key aim of Ecoflux Plan project is to preserve selected ecosystem in the Narin or Kyrgyzstan floodplains through renewable energies and short rotation plantation, including sustainable land and water management and capacity building. And in the following minutes, I would like to discuss the listed agenda, and I would definitely start with the country portfolio background and context in framework of energy, and that is here. So Kyrgyzstan is a home to 6.4 million people, and where most of the population reside in rural areas. And it says that 65% population or Kyrgyz population are situated in rural areas, and that is mostly high altitude region. Almost 50% of the Kyrgyz population is engaged with the agriculture sector for their livelihood. The average elevation of the country is 2,700 meters above sea level, and more than 90% of the country's territory is covered with the mountains, and this cold climate, high altitude region, and this mountainous characteristic makes Kyrgyzstan, let's say, or I would say the heating is the primary need of Kyrgyz people because of these three different geographical characteristic, and heating period lasts 6 to 9 months in Kyrgyzstan. At the same time, because of the mountainous characteristic, Kyrgyzstan is blessed with the abundant amount of hydro resources, and therefore 90% of electricity is generated with the hydropower and available with a non-cost effective electricity tariff, which is 0.01 USD per kilowatt hour. Because of the Soviet legacy, the access to electricity is 100% and available for urban and rural people, so that is not the problem. However, the problem is occurred during, or especially in a winter time, when the flow of the river is reduced because of the freezing temperature, and which leads to reduced power production. And at the same time, electricity demand rise during winter period, because most urban population use electricity-based district heating system, electricity-based heating system, and therefore the electricity use is hiked during winter period. At the same time, the production is not capable enough to meet that high demand, and therefore Kyrgyz population experience this kind of unreliable electricity supply in terms of blackouts or voltage fluctuation or shortages. And at the same time, rural people cannot afford and rely on the frequent fluctuate electricity, and low income does not allow to pay them even with this low non-cost effective electricity tariff, and therefore electricity is less suitable for heating in especially in the rural areas. Also, district heating is or access to district heating is very limited to 20% of the households, and which are mostly located in capital and nearby urban areas. So that's why rural areas are not connected with the district heating system, and therefore they need to rely on other energy sources. It should be highlighted here, and that is, let's say, the most of the rural houses built during the Soviet era, and it was 40 to 50 years ago, without any regard of energy efficiency measures, and then this kind of house designs yield high heat demand in the house, and it blend with this cold climate, and it's a really high heat demand. At the same time, they cannot rely on electricity. Even though they have access to electricity, they do not have access to district heating system, and therefore they heavily rely on the solid fuel consumption to maintain thermal comfort inside the houses. And from my own site visit, I recognize that for 100 meter square of floor area, you need 2 to 4 tons of coal or fire, in combination of 1 to 4 meter cube of firewood, and 1 to 2 truck load of cow dung to maintain thermal comfort or maintain at least the pleasant temperature inside the rural Kyrgyz home. And overusage of solid fuels make Kyrgyzstan most vulnerable to climate change in Central Asia. According to a report, more than 60% of the Kyrgyz population directly depend on the environment to meet their energy needs. And this, of course, contribute to indoor and outdoor air pollution. At the same time, they are highly rely on this riparian forest, and which leads to or partially contributes for the deforestation in Kyrgyzstan. So the energy services are unevenly distributed to urban and rural areas, and due to limited access to adequate, reliable, and sustainable energy services in rural areas, energy is a costly and crucial task. The energy need is usually derived from multiple natural energy resources, which I already explained, and which is considered as a common and predominant practice in all rural areas of Kyrgyzstan. And that's why it's important to address this issue, and that's why I'm highlighting the research objective and methodology here. So the majority of the rural population experience various challenges such as socioeconomic, environmental, energy, and climate related. However, out of all different challenges, the energy related issues are more critical, as energy access is the pivotal element for the overall development. And hence I try to perform bibliometric analysis of the most relevant keywords in the field of energy research in Kyrgyzstan, and you can see the bibliometric analysis on your screen. However, there is a gap in the research related to the rural communities and their energy behavior, because most of the research focus on let's say the how to say that, like this inter-country energy trade, water issues, the economic growth, economics, and then how the relation or political relation of Kyrgyzstan with the neighboring countries, agriculture, water supply, because it falls under this water stress region. So most of the research focused there. But however, the energy is not yet been in focus, and that's why this gap in research. And of course, there is a need to outline the rural livelihood and their energy behavior, or in other way, you can say that the household energy consumption pattern of rural Kyrgyzstan, as the majority of the Kyrgyz population reside in rural areas. However, as mentioned, there is a knowledge gap related what can provide an information to international readers about this energy behavior of rural communities, or let's say the detailed overview, and this on the special and unique energy behavior is missing. And to fill the knowledge gap, the presented research attempts to develop energy consumption pattern which describe the energy behavior of rural Kyrgyzstan. And to meet the research aim or research objective, I started or I performed the in-depth literature review. Also, I visited the field within the framework of a Flussplan project to understand the rural energy behavior, and then and to understand this rural livelihood, I tried to categorize energy demand, energy carrier, and energy source to provide the energy pattern as an outcome, and also let's say the various driving factors for improving rural energy services. Because like, yeah, on this at one hand you are identifying what's the problem, but on the other hand you also need to provide, let's say, what will be the solution, or let's say how this situation can be improved. And that's why I try to derive several factors for that, and which I will present on the next slide. And of course, so I'm to understand this such energy identity of rural Kyrgyzstan, I'm presenting the energy landscape for the same, and I'm trying to classifying the energy demand, sources, and carrier. So I would like to start with the energy demand. So as I already mentioned in the initial slides, that because of the mountainous nature of Kyrgyz territory, the Kyrgyz weather is influenced by the mountain ranges and this continental location. And this cold climate is responsible for higher or extended heating period in Kyrgyzstan. And in that case, the access to reliable and sufficient heat supply for house heating is essential for local people. The heating need is even more critical for high altitude, where most of the rural settlements are located, and the winter is extended. And then you can see this. I try to distribute this chart for urban versus rural, and you can see the most of the urban houses are made with the brick or panel or monolith materials, and therefore they are pretty good in condition. However, they also built several years ago. It's not in a, it's I would say it's old houses, but as compared to rural houses, they are far better in a good position, because their annual average space heat demand ranges between 100 to 150 kilowatt hour per meter square for and for the same heating period, or for the heat demand for rural areas are really ranges between 250 to 300 kilowatt hour per meter square, because rural areas or the residential building construction of rural areas are mostly with the earthen materials like clay, adobe, brick, or mud houses, and therefore the outdated residential buildings, inappropriate building structure, and the absence of the proper thermal insulation material result in such a high heat demand. And this is what I am presenting here. The second energy demand I try to illustrate, and that is, let's say, the electricity consumption. It's again a distribution of between urban and rural areas, and the interesting fact here is, let's say, as a result of the high thermal energy prices and low electricity tariff, a substantial urban Kyrgyz population practice individual electric base heating during the heating period. Hence, more electricity is required. At the same time, power production is reduced due to the reduced water flow, which I already explained. Anyway, it's important because of the urbanization, the high population density in urban area. The priority is always given to urban region, and because of the low population density, rural areas are left out from the reliable electricity supply, and therefore rural areas are not using as much amount of electricity compared to urban areas, and of course the electricity usage is higher during during winter time, and lower in summertime. It's common for urban and rural area. And of course, as I mentioned, most of the rural households are not connected with the, let's say, the central water supply system because of their isolated location, and also because of the limited infrastructure. Hence, most of the rural homes do not have a domestic hydraulic setup inside their home, which makes the hot water use limited, and that's why there is no accurate data which tells you that household energy or household use this much amount of hot water, and therefore it's difficult to quantify, let's say, the hot water consumption in rural areas. However, rural homes or households use this kind of traditional stove or electric stove mentioned on this displayed on the screen for hot water preparation. And for energy sources, electricity is, let's say, it's already strained. The electricity or power sector is strained because of this dependent or seasonal behavior. Also, the transmission lines were installed during Soviet time, and that's why they are in outdated infrastructure and yield to high transmission losses. For district heating, they are concentrated to urban areas, and or let's say, I would say, even capital areas and in nearby areas. They also have a high network heat losses because of the old structure, and that's why heat demand are always unmet for urban households, and that's why they rely on electricity or more electricity based heating, even though they are connected with the district heatings. A natural gas and let's say they are mostly available in urban areas. Limited gasification rate is slow down the natural gas connection to the country. Of course, the financial barrier and limited availability is, let's say, it's a common for all sources here. And as this district heating is available partially to urban areas. I don't know why this red box is missing here, so but sorry for that, but this red bar is the rural areas. To accomplish the primary need of heating, various options are available for starting from individual heating solution, household boiler, electric radiator, district heating system, and this district heatings are integrated to capital more, and that's why, let's say, the rural areas are highly used this individual or independent traditional heating solution, and close to 80% of the rural household use solid fuels operated traditional heating stove, and majority of the energy demand of rural Kyrgyzstan is achieved with the local resources such as coal, natural gas, coal, cow dung and firewood, which I already explained. But just to show this interconnectivity of this energy services, I just try to put that in again here. And based on all my observation and literature review, I try to plot this energy pattern for rural Kyrgyzstan. So the green boxes are the primary energy resources, blue boxes are the usable energy form, and the energy demand is illustrated with the red boxes. So yeah, of course, space heating, hot water, cooking, and lighting are the key and core energy demand for Kyrgyz people. That's, of course, that's nothing new. However, the way they fulfill the heat demand is really interesting, because the firewood, coal, residues, dried animal cow dung, electricity are, let's say, the usable energy form. But if you have a look that from where the firewood is coming, so let's say it's coming from riparian forests, self-grown trees, unless and until it's if it is a sustainable exploitation of the forest, and that's fine, it's, let's say, sustainable use. But if it will be over exploitation, then it will be partially harmful for local ecosystem. this is what researchers identify. If you talk about the coal, this is, let's say, most favorite solid fuels for meeting energy needs in Kyrgyzstan. So coal, yeah, it's coming from local mines, and if the coal it's like, I would say, if it is a shortage, they try to import coal with the higher price, and which leads a high price for rural people to pay to purchase coal. Agriculture sector gives residues. This active livestock field gives you the dry animal cow dung, and of course electricity is coming from national grid, and sometimes they also import electricity from neighboring countries because winter electricity production is not enough. Yeah, so it's complex energy use pattern which influenced by various factors, and therefore my next topic is to understand or explain the driving factors for improving rural energy services. And then I try to explain that the rural population face a complex energy structure to meet their primary energy need, and it is a widespread issue and it should be addressed immediately. And of course, the rural population generally benefits less from economic and infrastructural development than the substantial population cluster available in urban areas, and of course there are very limited and inadequate energy related analysis is a significant barrier to decode this such a complex energy structure. And that's why I'm trying to present some factors which are directly or indirectly interlinked with the access to energy services for rural areas. So here are, let's say, the key driving factors. I try to categorize the external or internal two classifications. Yeah, so the external external drivers are or factors are high altitude, cold climate, remote location, population density, limited transportation, and the energy policy. And internal, which is, let's say, a little bit independent from this whole geographic stuff, but it's still important because like the household income decide like how much they want to spend on energy expenditure. Building efficiency can be enhanced, and then they can try to reduce the heating fuel consumption, which leads to reduce heating expenditure. Their livelihood strategy, knowledge and awareness about the or related to energy, and their end use behavior for energy. I try to provide some graphical illustrations so it will be easy to understand. So I will not go too much in detail, but just to give you an overview here. Let's say most of the country is high altitude, and you can see, you can compare the altitude versus population density graph. So of course Bishkek and Osh are the most population or mostly dense because the most of the activities or economic activities are happening here. But when you switch or transit from low altitude to high altitude, you can see less population density there, and that's why rural communities are formulated with a low population density, and that's why it they are not getting benefit because it's with low population density. At the same time, you can see it's a really high too much cold, especially in the high altitude where most of the people are rural people are situated. And you can see this is the map of building footprint, and most of the buildings are situated in this next to Bishkek or in the Bishkek, and in like this Osh region with the high density. But at the same time, the rural communities are with the low building density, and the distance between two buildings are really high. So it's even not that practical or feasible to connect that buildings with the district heating, because you can expect too much amount or too much heat losses through the network. And at the same time, this building structure or without energy efficiency, the building energy consumption is 250 to 360 kilowatt hour meter square here, and this is, let's say, 2 to 3 times higher than the European levels. And that's why a huge potential for energy efficiency is waiting there. So if you want to integrate renewable energy there into Kyrgyz households, it's really advisable to first insulate their house and try to reduce such a huge number of the energy consumption, and then renewable energy integration will be feasible in context of rural Kyrgyz houses. And let's say for sustainable energy transition, yeah, Kyrgyzstan is blessed with a really good amount or potential of the renewable energy. For example, solar energy of Kyrgyzstan is 60% higher than the European countries because it's situated on high altitude. And therefore, integration of renewable energy to Kyrgyzstan can be solve multiple problems. So if you, let's say it's a power sector, heating sector, and renewable sources here, outdated infrastructure promotes solid fuel usage, low cost and low carbon heat generation. Sustainable and stable electricity generation can be achieved if you integrate renewable sources to heating and power sector. And just to conclude, like what my research contributed or what I identify, so energy pattern was identified, external and internal driving factors were classified. Building energy efficiency would substantially reduce the heating fuel consumption, and there is a huge scope for locally available materials for energy efficiency, and the recommendation for community-based energy solution. And yeah, I would like to close my presentation with it. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Sorry if I took a few more minutes, and I would love to answer your questions. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kedar. It's energy efficiency is indeed extremely important for the country, especially since that this year we will have a lot of discussion on this topic since there are some reforms in energy sector are envisaged, and there is a pretty intensive discussion in the society on whether it's really will help the sector or not. Dear participants, do you have any questions on this presentation or others? Please let us know. Franziska, yes, your question.
Yeah, thank you, Kedar, for that overview that you have provided. I think I agree with Saida. It is very important to think about the energy transition in the Kyrgyz Republic, and I also know how difficult this is in the country, and that the government has really tried hard just to adjust the energy tariffs to what would be cost recovery tariffs, which would also create investments in improving the grid and everything. But that's not that easy. But what I also miss a little bit, or with something we might want to consider, is also, you know, whatever the households do, there is the price, yes? Essentially, it is a matter of the price and how the different prices, let's say, compare between across the different energy sources. So, and I guess obviously there is a lot of potential also in rural area, maybe to move to solar power, wind power, and these kind of things. Nevertheless, who will fund that, and how will households be able to pay for that? Because essentially that households still use so much in rural areas, rely on solid fuel. It's also because generally this is also what they can access, and it is particularly for heating, it is a much cheaper source than having to rely on electricity, for example. And that's the options you have in rural areas. You have either electricity or you have solid fuels. And with all, you know, health implications that can have, but it is a question, I think, also eventually of the price.
Yeah, that's the really key and open question that, yeah, if you want to install something solar thermal based house heating solution, then who will fund that if they are not happy to, or if they are not able to pay, let's say this $1 per kilowatt hour electricity for their use, then it's too high amount, or it's not that practical. But I think even though these solid fuel prices are really fluctuated and it's hiked by a lot. So for example, 2 years ago, the 1 ton of coal in rural Kyrgyzstan cost almost 30 euro. And at this moment, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was in Kyrgyzstan to install some measurement devices, and then I asked or inquired about the coal prices, and then answer was like, now the price is 55 euros. So it's a really fluctuating, and of course they need some holistic solution, and of course the single family solution will not be helpful here, and that's why I concluded in my conclusion that this community-based energy solution can be helpful here, because like their whole community can be involved, and then I know it's not possible directly to it's not possible to integrate solar energy directly to any home, because like the heat demand is too high. Then that's why you need a really huge amount of solar field to install, and that's why somewhere first we need to focus on energy efficiency. Is, I would say, it's like a step-by-step solution. So first, let's say energy efficiency. First, we need to try to reduce the heat demand first. The heat demand will be somehow in a measurable unit. It's fine to integrate then this solar energy. On the same time, government should focus more on to supply a constant and reliable electricity to households, and that's why maybe it will be more easy to use electricity for house heating, and they can try to reduce their solid fuel consumption. This is, let's say, the kind of a strategy we should think about.
Thank you very much, Kedar. Yes, indeed, this topic is not easy for implementation on both sides, on the supply side and demand on consumer sides. So we have 1 minute left to wrap up. So if there is no burning questions, let me check chart. So there is no questions there. If someone has a burning question, please ask all our speakers. So I don't see that anyone is raising their hand. So let me wrap up. So I think that let me switch to Russian first. В первую очередь разрешите мне поблагодарить всех наших докладчиков. Я думаю, что наша сессия была очень интересна и по тематике, и по реальным результатам, которые данные исследования получили, и с точки зрения государственных политик и вообще с точки зрения домашних хозяйств, с точки зрения государства, эти исследования могут иметь достаточно много дальнейших шагов. И я думаю, что в этом есть большой вклад как и исследователей, которые сегодня презентовали, так и нашей конференции. Я со стороны всех участников также поблагодарю еще раз организаторов конференции «Жизнь в Кыргызстане» и надеюсь видеть вас снова в следующем году с новыми интересными докладами. Большое спасибо. Если еще возникнут, я знаю, что организаторы будут размещать доклады на веб-сайте, поэтому они будут в доступе. Если у вас будут вопросы, пожалуйста, обращайтесь. И до новых встреч. Всем спасибо большое.